Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategy Gaming Dojo, where we find, learn, and play one more turn of the great strategy games. And today we're going to continue on with our Let's Play of Gary Grigsby's War in the Pacific Admiral's Edition. In this episode, we will be setting up the islands of the Philippines. Well, I say the islands, it will be the island of Luzon this time around, which includes Manila, Clark Field, Bataan. A lot of things going on here. General Douglas MacArthur is here in the Philippines. There are a ton of subs, and if you've been listening to these, various episodes, the tutorial, the Let's Play, you know I love the submarine game. Well, let's go down here in Manila and look at all of these glorious submarines. The United States had all of their submarines based, all of their Asian-based submarines at Manila. And so that is their home base. Now we're going to have to figure out something to do with those because ultimately, as you see, the rising sun is right here. They will immediately be coming to the northern end of Luzon and pushing down the island. And when they do that, we've got a lot of stuff here. It's not enough. I don't believe I've ever played a game where the Philippines was not taken by the Japanese. Um, so eventually, I mean, we've got B-17s out here. We're going to have to move and get out, because we do have some aircraft. It's woefully inexperienced pilots. Um, it's P-40E Warhawks mainly, so it's an okay plane for this time, but the pilots just don't have what it takes. So we're going to have to get, some air stuff out, but really it'll just be the big bombers. The fighters we're going to put them up in cap and try to take as many Japanese planes with us as we can. We'll hope that we'll maybe catch some bombing runs. The main Japanese bombers early on are the Bettys and the Nells. They'll be flying, quite often with zeros, and these zeros will knock out our fighters early in the game fairly easily, especially when we have very inexperienced pilots. But you do have situations where they will fly the Bettys or the Nells. They'll come in unescorted, and you just by chance get a turkey shoot on them, for 5, 6 planes. And that's what we'll be trying to do. Ultimately, we're playing a game of attrition with the Japanese. You want to take out as much as you can because unlike you as the Allies, the Japanese have a very hard time replacing equipment, but even more importantly, and maybe the most important aspect of the game in the Pacific is they have a very hard time replacing their pilots. So if you can take down planes and kill, knock out their experienced pilot corps, you will have a very good chance of winning the game. Because ultimately, when it comes down to it, as the allied player, you're going to be getting a lot of stuff. And so if you're playing they lose five and you lose five game, that's plays right into your hands. Okay. What you don't want to do is you lose 30 and they lose one. Although, here in the Philippines, sometimes we're just not going to have a, a lot of choice. Now, another thing that goes with the Philippines here is, what do you do with the Philippine troops? Um, and that goes to General Douglas MacArthur, who, and I'll just say this is just my own personal opinion. You can think what you want, but he is one of the most overrated military figures, certainly in United States history, probably in world history. Um, he ultimately prevailed and strode aboard the ship to sign the peace treaty with Japan, of course, but that had very little to do with him and his stubbornness, his obstinance. Uh, his ridiculousness at times dearly cost the Allies in many places. I will tell you, if you ever want to get a good look into this, you should read Dwight Eisenhower's biography or autobiography, his memoirs. Eisenhower was actually the chief of staff for MacArthur over in the Philippines during the late 1930s. So what had happened was is the Philippines was had a ruler. I think it was a king, uh, or that's what they called it. But it was basically a dictator or king, whatever you want to say. And they invited the United States to come over and train their troops and kind of beef up their military a bit. This dictator, king, whatever you want to call him, he wanted their military to be better. They sensed after the Japanese had attacked China, there was a real sense of urgency in the Philippines by the Filipinos themselves. Now, the Americans thought, well, we've got bases here. There's no way the Japanese will dare attack us. We should be fine. But the Filipinos really wanted to beef up their military, so they asked Washington to send someone over. And Roosevelt, looked around and said, okay, we're going to send Douglas MacArthur, who at that time, boy, I don't know his rank. I should look at what his rank was at the time. But he went over to the Philippines with Dwight Eisenhower as his chief of staff, which is kind of odd when you think about it, because later on in the war, of course, you think of Eisenhower being in control of all Allied forces, at least in Europe, where he eventually outranked MacArthur. But he was his chief of staff for quite some time in the Philippines. And MacArthur, Eisenhower talks about how he's essentially a peacock, right? He looks great in a uniform. He was kind of tall and thin. He's got the corncob pipe. He had all of those like peacocking kind of things going on, but that he enraged the Filipinos. He wanted their entire military to be under his command when essentially they had just brought him over as an advisor to say, hey, this is how your military should be structured and whatnot. MacArthur kind of decided he was going to take over the entire Filipino military, which led to all kinds of back and forth with Washington and whatnot. But Eisenhower essentially thought MacArthur was a fool and wrote about it extensively. So if you're interested in that part of history and want to know much about it, you should go read Eisenhower's autobiography. But back to the task at hand here, which is let's set up Luzon. But before we do that, um, well, I'm going to do two things. First of all, in this same setup, in this uh, in the alphabetical order. We set up the line islands as well, and the line islands are very important. They're the start of our crescent. I call it the Iron Crescent from Pearl Harbor down south before you turn the corner here and start to head west towards Australia. Christmas Island and Palmyra are very important. Now, there's not a whole lot to say about them in the setup because they don't, at the start of the war, they just didn't have a whole lot happening. Um, Palmyra has these Catalinas out here that just have an incredible range. So you see, they are going to be flying some naval search out here, way west, way, way west, to kind of the edge of where they will be seeing Japanese ships coming back and forth, maybe see the task force that bombed Pearl Harbor. Anyway, that's the main thing going on there. Now, we do have some Marines down here. I don't think we've seen many Marines. Um, and you can always tell they've got well, this is called the Defense Battalion Artillery, but generally when you see the blue and the anchor, those are going to be Marines. We also have a base force. So we'll be building up Palmyra by building up the port, which we don't often do, and the forts, of course. The airfield capacity is already at 2 based on a 0, so not too far that we could go there. So we're just not going to build any further. But we will be building up the port because we would like to beef this up a little bit. We'll be bringing more troops out here. There is a stacking limit on Palmyra, I do believe, and so we'll have to watch out for that. Yep, troop capacity is 6,000, so we can't go above that. Down at Christmas, now Christmas is a little more substantial. It's already got a 2-1, a 1-5 out here. I say more substantial. It's relatively speaking, right? There was a ship out here. It was a tanker, the Eidsvold, and the Eidsvold we are sending back to Pearl. It's got that 8,800 endurance. It's like that kind of small to medium type tanker. Not great capacity or anything. This is a good tanker to run, and I don't have it set for anything now. When it gets back to Pearl, probably load it up, bring it to Christmas, bring it to Palmyra, maybe around the corner to Pago, although that might be a little far for it, but we'll figure that out then. Right now, we just have some engineers out here. We will be bringing obviously quite a bit more eventually. Uh, this does not have a stacking limit on the troops, so that's good. Oftentimes you kind of think of these three together for obvious reasons, but really Christmas Island is the important one. Uh, of course, you don't want the Japanese to come here and land on Palmyra, but you can get planes out here, you can get task forces out here that also kind of protect Palmyra. And so Christmas is really what to think about in that sense. Now, the second thing I wanted to do, because that was really it for the Line Islands, there's not a whole lot to say because not a whole lot's going on. While I have the big map up, it's just pretty obvious, right? Pearl to here. And as you look at it, I mean, there is nothing out here to the east of this. And so, if you're a Japanese player, it's not like you're flying by Pearl Harbor and saying, gosh, I really want this, piece of real estate out here in the Pacific. You're going to be looking at Pearl. Obviously, you're going to be looking directly south here, right? But you may push this way. And so, these islands become very important. And really, it's Christmas Island because that's where you start to, well, right here is where you round the corner. So a little bit south of Christmas. But if the Japanese were to take Christmas Island, then, you got to take things from Pearl Harbor, like around this way, or you have to take all of this down here. Plus, they would have a staging base for submarines, maybe. They couldn't really rearm, but I would have some place to go back to for a fueling depot or something. Um, and so, Christmas is very important. Now, the reason I brought this up is I really wanted to talk about the Philippines because, just looking at the map here, you can see their obvious importance. I mean, the Japanese war effort out here in the Pacific, it juts down here and around like that, where would be the next obvious place to go? I mean, it's the closest place to the home islands. It's directly south from this Chinese invasion. They also have staging bases here, and they have staging bases here. Now, I can tell you, I say, well, it's the most obvious. They are going to be coming from multiple directions. They're going to come south into the Philippines here. They're going to come south into Malay and start pushing, and they will also start landing troops here at Borneo. Um, but that looks obvious to you, right? Now, what is going on in the Philippines? Well, let's go look. Let's get out of here because we actually have a lot of material in the Philippines. And as I said, if we come here to, I'm sorry, to Manila, we'll see the major USAFFE command headquarters, General Douglas MacArthur. They give him a 71 leadership, 34 inspiration. Now, I said earlier, not, well, I guess I did say earlier in this series of videos that I don't really mess around with the command structure too much in War in the Pacific. There are maybe a few that I might change. If you get a carrier task force or if you get a major strike force later on, that's going, an assault force that's going to try to take a Japanese island, I may look at that commander or that admiral and say, hey, I need to replace this guy because he's just not, he's not up to it. But I would say in War in the Pacific, I do that very seldom. Now, this week I talked about how I'm going to start playing War in the East or do a tutorial Let's Play for War in the East, and that's just the opposite. I change generals and corps commanders all the time, division commanders all the time in War in the East because I don't know, I feel like it makes a bigger difference there who your commanders are. And maybe I should look into it more here in War in the Pacific. Obviously, I played a lot of the game. I've, beaten the Japanese AI, I've beaten Japanese players, and so I feel like, oh, okay, well, I really, understand and know the game. I will say this, I don't know the swapping in and out commanders. I will say this, that Cole doesn't really talk about it a whole lot on his spreadsheet. I almost feel like there's so much material here and that maybe leadership isn't as important. I don't know. I mean, maybe another experienced player can weigh in on that and they think that leadership is incredibly important. But I just do not go down that rabbit hole. I feel like this is the kind of game you can only pick so many rabbit holes to go down, and that's just not one that I've gone down. Now, again, in War in the East, the first thing I do is swap out the main German commander, Franz Halder, for von Klug. I mean, it's literally the first thing I do in the game. In War in the Pacific here, I really just don't. I just don't do it much. I mean, like I said, if you have a big task force, assault force, sometimes I'll look at the guy, and if he just looks terrible, then I'll swap him out. That doesn't mean it's not interesting, right? It's General MacArthur. That's a big name. It's kind of interesting. Here he is. One thing I will bring up about MacArthur is even there's no reason to try to get him off the island as if, you're going to lose a general out here, right? Um, if this unit is quote unquote captured, killed, whatever, he will show up again in Australia. Like you don't lose MacArthur. They kind of make an allowance for the fact that they would have, the United States would have flown in a mission, a special mission, special forces, whatever it took, to go get the Allied commander out here in the Philippines out of being captured or killed. So they make allowance for that. So you don't have to do it. You don't have to go sail a transport into Manila and try to get him out. So that brings us to the island itself. And the big parts of the island that you have to worry about are Manila, Bataan, and Clarkfield. It's this triumvirate. They're all three kind of stacked here together. Now you have some other places where there's other things going on. Iba is here. Um, I think we pretty, oh, Lingayen, we have a little something. Now, the Japanese generally speaking, land in the northeastern part up here of the island and just start pushing straight down this road network. And there's nothing you're going to be able to put out here to stop them. Now, you may have noticed we are taking some subs and we're laying mines out here at Apari. We also have an absolute sub blanket covering this area. So if you ever want to see all of your patrol zones, just hit 6 and you can see every patrol that you're running. I mean, we're covering pretty much everything around the Philippines. It is thick. And in many cases, this is not just one sub, it is a couple. Oh, that reminds me of a question that somebody had posed to me about submarines operating in wolf packs. Because when you think of World War II and you think about the German subs, the U-boats that had so much success, they operated, in packs. So they would have 3 or 6 or, 7 or 8 submarines all operating together under the theory that, they could kind of help each other out. It's more confusing, to the enemy. It's not like you're just one sub and they start throwing, down depth charges. It's like, wait a minute, is there one? Is there five? They're coming from every direction. And also, if they did find something, think of the name Wolfpack. It's like they aggregate on that prey, right? Um, Over here in the Pacific, that was not part of U.S. submarine doctrine. It's also not part of Japanese submarine doctrine. Now, obviously, submarine doctrine was developed during the war because submarines really just hadn't been prevalent before that time. And, the Germans were ahead of their time in operating that way in some respects. But I'll tell you, for the game purposes, you have that max react at 1, right? What you'll find is as your submarines are kind of working close together, and when you have this blanket like this, that when a sub finds something, let's say here, okay, this whatever patrol zone this is, they find something here, and let's say it's a Japanese task force of some sort. You have another sub that'll be coming around, and all of a sudden, gets on the scent of that thing. And so that's kind of how those max reacts, when you think about max reacts, react 1. And it's unfortunate that you can only do it at 1 for the subs, but it makes some sense, right? Because this is 40 full miles. The sub would probably, at this point in time in history, have to come to the surface to get a message that another sub had found something somewhere. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense that they would just instantaneously know. Well, of course that makes zero sense, but it doesn't make a lot of sense that they would sail, 160 miles, let's say, to go hit this other task force. But you will see as they're working out here in close proximity to each other, that sometimes, they'll wound something, and as that wounded thing starts to move, there are subs coming in like piranhas, right? Well, that's what we want anyway. Let's hope that's not a Japanese sub and the shoe's not on the other foot. So, anyway, I just wanted to mention that the wolf pack and running, multiple subs in a task force just was not really part of US or Dutch, we've got Dutch subs out here, or Dutch submarine doctrine at the start of the war, and really didn't become doctrine later on. US subs, even to this day, the nuclear subs don't really run in packs. And, that we could go, we could spend an hour or two talking about which is the better way to operate a subfleet. Nowadays, of course, when you've got 20 nuclear missiles aboard, maybe you don't want anything else that close, but that's a whole different topic. So anyway, if you ever want to see the patrol zones, you just hit 6, and there we go. You can see them all. Now, I made notes, as always. We've already talked about Christmas and Palmyra. Um, Clark Field. Clark Field, there are a lot of things happening at Clark Field. It's a level 8 airbase. Um, you will have noticed if you set this up beforehand or, over the last few days or before, that this is a place where replacements are on. So now we've turned replacements off for almost everything, but this is a place where replacements are on. You're going to try to, and we've talked about this, right? You don't want things in San Diego replacing. You don't want things way out of the hot theater of action replacing. These are the kind of places where you want replacements on. You want these guys to get beefed up, to get built up. A lot of these start in not the best of shape. Um, those two aren't a good example, but you want to build these up as much as you can. And to the extent the Japanese are going to be bombing the absolute living heck out of Clark Field and Manila. Okay, so the bombers are coming. You want to get, pieces replaced so that by the time the Japanese land forces get down here, you don't just have an empty husk. You don't want these units to essentially their elements are all completely disrupted. Half of them are destroyed, and the Japanese just topple you over like a domino because essentially have an empty husk of a unit. So we're going to have those reinforce or the replacements on, and we're going to try to replace whatever we can. Now remember, that's kind of a abstraction, right? It's not as if we have actual ships that are coming up here with our replacements and saying, oh, well, here's a new howitzer or something. It happens as an abstraction. We might as well take advantage of that because these are hostile waters very quickly. I mean, we have our subs all over the place, but there will be Japanese subs, there will be Japanese task forces all over the place, and especially Japanese bombers down here very, very quickly, you know, literally from turn one. So we're going to have those replacements on. Now you've got a bunch of planes here. You see, we're training these guys. It's only 4 planes, not a biggie. These are the P-35As. Okay. Then we have some more P-35As. They're also training. So we have these guys training. Then we have our first cap here with a P-35A. Uh, Unfortunately, they're back in maintenance. So, question if those are the guys we want to start off up in cap. But anyway, that's the way we're starting. We have a recon unit here, the O-47A. Now, we saw this before. I believe these guys over. Hmm, that's interesting. I know, oh, maybe Australia? I don't know. Anyway, I guess it doesn't really matter. Search 50 out there. We got a 240, 290 arc out. So we're going dead west here. Okay. Why not? It doesn't, in some respects, it doesn't matter. These guys are, you know, their widows are going to get a letter at some point, flying those kind of missions as the Japanese come in. Um, Here we've got the P-40B Warhawk. We actually have 15 of these over here. We will be flying a 60% cap. It is what, oh, we're flying these guys out at 20,000, which if you look at the P-40B anyway, it keeps its maneuverability up to 15,000. It keeps an okay, up to 20. So, we're going to fly these guys out at 20. You may have noticed that Cole has us doing some leveling here. We've got some 20, we've got some 15, we've got some 10, so depending on what altitude the Japanese come in at, we're going to have somebody out there. As always, the higher, the better, generally speaking. Obviously, I know that's not always the case, but if you're just speaking generally for fighters, you want them coming from above. They do gain an advantage there. So if we can tie up some of the Japanese Zeros down at 10 or 15,000 feet, because their bombers are probably going to come, and we'll see in the combat reports what altitude their bombers are coming in at. Uh, it just depends. Sometimes the Japanese like to come in at 12,000 because it avoids your flak. Flak is, think about 9,000, 10,000 is kind of the maximum altitude you can get flak up. And so the Japanese sometimes will want to come in at 12, but if they really want to put it on you, they'll come in at 8 or 7. Well, we've got these guys up at 20, so if we can tie them up down here, hopefully we can take out some things, even though we've got, I mean, this is not ideal, not ideal at all. So it is what it is. What are we going to do? This is one of the big things I wanted to talk about here, and this is these B-17s. Um, I I try to get these suckers out of here as soon as I can. Now you can't do much, right, when they're in maintenance. We could rail them somewhere south. What you do not want with any of your B-17s on the Philippines, and down here, I know when we set this up later, just having set up Cole's spreadsheet before, we have some B-17s actually flying some bombing missions over here. Um, I think we hit this area, the Palau Islands. Um, I generally overrule that and don't do that. Um, I like the B-17s. I like to have them, as many of them available as I can. And just keeping them on the Philippines seems like a waste to me. You do not want these things destroyed sitting on a runway somewhere. If you're going to do that, then by all means, fly the suicide mission and maybe you take something out. But really, I try to bounce them down here. I think maybe you have to. well, they've got a really good maximum range, but I can't remember exactly how far you can take them. Maybe Devo and then Ballot Poppin'. I just don't remember off the top of my head, and we'll do it later during the Let's Play. But I'm going to get these guys the heck out of here as soon as I can. Now, I know he had them transferring down to Cagayan. Um, Now, his spreadsheet is based on the December 7th scenario, and so it's possible between December 7th and 8th they went into maintenance because they're not available to head down there. So, what can we do? They're not available. Clark Field has a weird setup. They don't actually, if you hit your F6 key, you can see where tiles can be, traversed and where they cannot be. And you'll see here, they don't really have a C tile. This red here says that no, it looks like it could be a port here, and it does have a port too, but it's not from this tile, okay? And really, there's no ships here. There's nothing to do with any ships here. So it is, it kind of doesn't matter. I just wanted to point out that the Japanese also would not be able, it's essentially this, even though this little sliver right there looks like it's touching, it's really not. Okay, and so this is just a total land hex. Anyway, just keep that in mind. Now you have Bataan here, and Bataan, we have actually quite a few troops heading there. Later on, when you set up Manila, you'll notice there are a lot of things already marching. They're just not moving. And I have that in my notes from Manila. There are lots of units marching, but they were not in move mode. Like these guys are going to Clark Field. We have others, right? Uh, Anti-aircraft going to Bataan. Okay. We have, anyway, we're not going to go through every one of them. The point being is just don't forget this. A lot of these guys are marching somewhere, but they're not in move mode, so they're going to move a lot slower. Might as well speed them up, right? They're going someplace else. So just make sure you go down there and look at those and get them in move mode if they're on the march. Um, Oh, IBA. I wanted to talk about IBA for a minute because this is, again, one of the first places where we are turning repair off. Okay, and this will come up again in Malaya. It'll come up all through Sumatra and the Dutch East Indies as the Japanese are on the march. Eventually, like in places like Palembang or Tarakan or Balikpapan, just depending, how close the Japanese are, at some point you're going to want to turn, oh, I'm sorry, it's here. At some point you're going to want to return or turn repair off. And why is that? Is because the Japanese are going to be bombing these places, and the Japanese are eventually going to be taking these places over. Well, when you combine those two things, they will be damaging essentially their own production, right? Because this is going to become Japanese production. Well, in this case, resources. These are going to become Japanese resources. Right now, we're repairing them every time they get bombed, or we were, but now we've turned that off. And as they come in and bomb these resources, it's like they're bombing their own resources because we're not going to have control of them 2 weeks into the game. So the more damage you can get them to do to things that are going to be theirs, the better. And just, as you move through various places here, or as the Japanese are advancing towards certain places, like here in Manila, for instance, we turned repair off on manpower. That may seem like a strange thing to turn repair off on, right? Manpower, but it's an abstraction of the game. Resources off, light industry off. Now all of these were on before and we're turning them off. Repair shipyard off. And so as the Japanese bomb Manila, they are going to be reduced. We see here repair shipyard has 20 points to start with. In parens is how many points of damage it's taken? Well, right now it's in pristine condition. It's zero. As the Japanese bomb Manila, though, this will start to go up 1, 2, 6, 8, 10. And they'll have to bring a ton of engineers in to try to repair this. And you can really make it almost not worth their while. For a repair shipyard this close to their home islands, they're not going to repair this, right? But light industry, I mean, this is 100 in light industry. If you can get them to take out 80 of their 100, what is going to be their 100 of light industry, and they have to bring in, engineers that they have in short supply in here to try to repair that light industry, that's just that's an advantage to you. You know, that's an advantage to you as the allied player. Um, Before we jump fully into Manila here, let's talk about a few other things. Oh, I wanted to talk about Jalo. We are sending quite a few things here to Jalo. Uh, that's really as a kind of a bing bang out of here, right? This is you can come here for safety, and then we're going to shoot you south. Maybe you need some fuel. Okay. Maybe you just need protection because the Japanese are in hot pursuit. We've got a lot of things coming to Jalo, and I don't even know if it may be pronounced Holo. I don't know. I call it Jalo. It just sounds more fun to me. Um, but Jalo, we're building up with quite a few things. I want to mention that. Do, 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 do. Okay. I think actually, maybe that was like the only, just kind of random point I wanted to make. You may say, hey, all of your points are random, but that really was the random point. Manila, this is what I was thinking as I was setting up Manila, is we have cap up, and boy, oh boy, we've got 21 planes. Great. That's fantastic. They're P40Es. Excellent. We can run them at 15,000 with no maneuverability penalty. But the problem, of course, here is, we're sending these guys up to their death. Uh, 40 experience is just, it's not good enough, but you don't really have a choice. You've got to try to bloody the Japanese nose a little bit here. You can't just let them send in unmolested bombers to hit Manila, to hit Clark, to hit Bataan. You just can't because it's going to be too easy of a cakewalk for them. And every day matters as they're marching south because meanwhile, over here in the US, down here in Australia, over in Cape Town, in England, you're building production to eventually strike back, but it's going to take a little while, and you've got to slow them down. So you're sending up, for the previous guys were 40-40. Here you've got 45-45 uh, on a cap of 60. Again, this is 22 planes, so all told, we've got what 43 fighters up. They will eventually, pretty much all be wiped out, and we know that from the start. But hopefully we can take a number of bombers and a zero here and there along with them. So, it is what it is. You got to send them up. There's no reason to try to get them out of here and do what? Ultimately, they're more important to be sent up here as almost like cannon fodder to try to slow the Japanese down. And so I did want to point that out. Oh, while we've got the planes up here, the Catalinas, I did want to point out you're reducing the range on the Catalinas. And this is something to just think about in general. When you have these planes, so, I mean, that's a really nice range, right? But it's not their maximum range. They could go out to 19 on extended, and we dialed it back to 15. Now, so far in our setup, pretty much we've set every plane to their extended radius. It does cause some additional operational losses, but it's not so severe that you wouldn't rather have the extra hexes. And so we've been taking the extra hexes. But in this case, when you're sending up a plane or a squadron, I'm sorry, morning, afternoon, you're sending up these planes in the morning and you're flying actually over Japanese bases and into the teeth of Japanese cap. You don't want to push that too far. I mean, it's one thing to fly over Formosa. It's another thing to have this out at 19 and you're, touching one of the home islands because they are going to blast that out of the air right away. Same with this group of Catalinas. At its maximum, of course, it's coming way out here into China. Well, for one thing, you don't need it over land. It's doing naval search. But secondly, there's just no reason to maybe take it a little too far. So anyway, we just keep it out over the sea here. So I did want to point that out for the Catalinas. Repair off, we talked about that. Lots of units on the move. We obviously talked about that. So that brings us to one of the really fun things about this episode, which are the subs. And first of all, I'll mention the PT boats just to say there are a lot of PT boats at Manila. And we space them out. These guys are on suicide missions. They will get absolutely destroyed very quickly. They really have no business trying to get into any kind of surface battle, but they will give us detection. You know, they may detect for a sub, which is really what I hope they do. Is you get these PT boats out at Legazpi. You get them out at well, these guys are at Manila, Iba. You know, to the extent you're pretty much always going to spot a Japanese task force anyway, but they may have a touch here, they may see something, whatever. They're out there. They're pieces of equipment. They're worth 1 point apiece. So send them out there, and who knows, you may get lucky. I mean, I've had a PT boat take out a light cruiser before, just completely randomly. You just never know. It's kind of like playing the lottery. You can't win if you don't play. And so we're sending these PT boats out just to have some fun. These guys are going to be buzzing around, drinking a lot of beer, I hope, knowing that hopefully they've written a letter home. But look at all the subs. And there are a few things I wanted to talk about subs here before I end the episode. And that is, well, one bigger point is that I've been talking, maybe not directly, but on some threads with Cole about patrol zones. And, he's always very, very clear when it comes to the spreadsheet that these individual hexes are not meant to be like some kind of gospel. You don't have to go and count every, and say, oh gosh, this is, 8265, but it's supposed to be 8365. Oh, I got to go change that. That being said, I think that I can speak for myself and say that my personality is I would never set this up and not have it to be exactly the numbers that I think are best. Cole and others, and myself, I recommend that you don't lessen your enjoyment of the game by hunting for every specific hex. You can always do, patrol around an area. But as anyone that's played the game for a while will tell you, just never put that on land because it only gives you 2 patrol points. Um, Put it out in the ocean because it will give you 3 patrol points. Okay? That's just how the game is set up. That's how it's coded and how it was developed. Why that is, I don't know exactly, but always set your, so you can easily come out here and say patrol around this area, and the game will set up a pretty decent 3 point patrol zone for you. That being said, I know how many of us are. If you're interested in this game, you want to play this game and you enjoy it, you probably have some OCD. I know I do. And it would be very hard for me just to set them this way and then say, gosh, I hope the computer set that up okay. I like to go out and put them all into place. Now, how do I do that? Because I can do it pretty quickly now. Um, and I just wanted to show you, if you're a new player, a kind of quick and dirty guide to finding this stuff, okay? So I know after playing for a ton, kind of a fast way to do this, or I'm just used to doing it, and that's half the battle of anything. But Manila is at 79.77, right? You're setting all of these up at 79 or at Manila. I just called it 79.77. You're setting all of these up from Manila. Now, just, this is left to right, the 79, and the 77 is up to down. So, the more you go down, the higher the number. The more you go to the right, the higher the number. So take the sea lion, okay? Now the sea lion, we wanted to set up at 79.73. Now I'm not even going to look. I'm just going to go and show you what I do. So what I would do is hit set patrol zone 1, okay? And I'm here at Manila, and I would just go here. And I would say, oh, 75.76. I need to go 4 to the right. Oh gosh, of course I just blanked on that. What did I say it was? How funny. Let's go back and try this again. Let's do the porpoise. Okay. I was too busy talking and not thinking. 101.64. Okay. 101.64. Well, I know that I'm at 79.77. Okay. So I know that I'm going to have to go quite a bit east and up, basically right and left. I'm going to have to go about 22 to the right, and I'm going to have to go about 13 up. So I would just say 22, 13. You know, come out here, and then once you orient yourself in the hex, then you can say, oh, I need to go another 4 and 4. You know what I'm saying? Is just find a hex kind of in the area and then do it. I know that when I first started out, and maybe you're still struggling with this, that I would click on this and then I would say, oh, that's not right. And then I'd go back, and I'd look again, and then I'd say, oh, that's not right. Instead, just very quickly go, you know that you have to go about 20 and 13, something like that. Just click on it, find your orientation somewhere close, and then you say, oh, it's just, it's 2 over and 2 up. Then you set 1. And if you don't get it exactly right, that's okay. So again, I'll just do this to show you in practice, mainly because I just want to get one right again. Um, 79.73, okay? We're at 79.77. So this would be an easy one, right? Um, we're going to go up 4. We're already at 79, so just be 1, 2, 3, 4, and there it is. And you see 79.73. Let's say that we wanted to find 101.86. I just made that up. Okay, 101.86. Well, we came out here, it's 102. So I would then back up, okay? And then I'd say 101.74. It's 12 down from there, 101.86. Just orient yourself first of all. I just wanted to say that for a second because we didn't really go over patrol zones or how to quickly do it. Um, during the tutorial. So I'm not going to go through every last patrol zone. We can look and see here. We've got patrols running here on the southern end of China. We've got all kinds of patrols going here because if you look, really the Japanese would have to come through here or through here to make it over to Malay, right? And Malay is going to be a hotspot very soon. We have a lot going on here because often the Japanese will come down here and also try to hit the southern end of the island, or they'll come here to late and try to, hit the eastern part of the island. Um, we are now starting to set up patrols around the home islands and hopefully can pick off some things there. Um, oh, the last thing I wanted to mention this time uh, also had to do with, well, there are two things, both having to do with subs. One is when you get done setting up a lot of subs like this, go through and make sure that just click one after the other and make sure that you've set up, well, this is mind lane, but make sure that you've set up their max react to 1. I will always go through after setting up that many subs because it seems like kind of a easy thing to miss. You're focusing on the patrol zone. Next thing you know, you've got a bunch of subs out there with a max reactive 0. I'm glad I saw this mine layer back here because I did want to point out maybe you noticed that once you hit your mission as sub mine laying, it automatically, when as you come to the screen, it will tell you it loads mines. And that's because we're coming out of Manila. Manila has mines. It automatically loads those on for you. You don't have to you don't have to push a button. Essentially, you're doing that when you make it a mine laying mission. So I did want to mention that. Um, Really, that's about it. I mentioned earlier in the episode that Manila is our sub base for all US submarines early in the game here. It becomes a real problem once you lose Manila. Of course, Surabaya is a very nice port, but you're bringing all your Dutch subs here. Darwin is not really set up to be a sub base. Oftentimes you may end up with them coming back to Townsville. It's not ideal, but a lot of the subs that will end up out here that are running, patrol out here, Pearl Harbor is their closest place to go back to. But for subs that are operating here, it's really unfortunate there's not a really nice allied base for you to bring your subs to on the northern part of Australia. There just isn't. I mean, really, Townsville kind of becomes your fallback that you have to start using because there's just not a better place. And so anyway, we won't be losing Manila hopefully for a little bit, but as it gets close, you do not want to forget to set your home port for all of those subs someplace different. You don't want them sailing into Manila Bay and saying, "Oh my gosh, that does not look like the U.S. color of red on the flag." That might be a rising sun. You certainly don't want that with your sub task forces. So we'll be thinking about that as the game goes on. So anyway, hey, we have now set up part of the Philippines. We're really moving along through the spreadsheet. I think that, there's a really good chance here in the next week, and I'm going to make that my goal as we enter the new year, 2021. By the way, Happy New Year to everyone. I'm filming this, I'm filming as if I'm on screen. I'm recording this on New Year's Eve. So I hope everyone has a happy new year. In 2021, we are going to be covering a lot of great strategy games and a lot of great war games. So, stick around. As always, from Strategy Gaming Dojo, I do appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did and you haven't subscribed, give me a subscribe. I always appreciate it. But until next time, have a great one.